Part 1. In the early months of 1942, the Pacific was a theater of chaos, strategy, and sudden, brutal encounters that would define the Second World War in ways both dramatic and deadly. Japanese naval intelligence officers in Tokyo pored over reports arriving by the hour, lines of text and coded dispatches that were meant to describe the realities of war. They were disciplined, trained to process information dispassionately. But this stream of incoming intelligence made even the most seasoned veterans pause. Something in the Solomons was defying their understanding of naval warfare, and they could not reconcile it with any conventional model. Reports came from Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and scattered outposts across the islands, each telling the same story, almost word for word. Sailors from multiple ships swore they had witnessed a phenomenon so extraordinary that it strained credulity. It was a single American light cruiser, yet it seemed to operate beyond the known limits of firepower and human coordination. Its guns unleashed a continuous wall of fire, the kind of relentless, sustained barrage that should have been mechanically impossible. Officers described muzzle flashes that lined the deck like a strip of glowing molten metal, illuminating the ship in bursts so rapid it created the illusion of a solid wall of light. The reports were horrifying in their clarity. Several of the Imperial Navy's most prized vessels lay in ruin, sunk, or burning on the ocean floor. Destroyers and cruisers, ships that had been designed and built to withstand significant punishment, were shredded in minutes. Shell after shell struck their hulls with precision, each impact a testament to the extraordinary capabilities of the vessel the sailors had come to think of as a monster. Casualty reports indicated hundreds of men lost in a matter of hours, the survivors recounting events that seemed almost supernatural. Japanese officers compared notes, their faces pale, voices taut with disbelief. This was no ordinary engagement. This was something beyond the limits of known naval engineering. Estimates suggested the American cruiser had fired over 1,500 shells in less than an hour. To understand the magnitude of this, one had to consider the constraints of naval artillery in 1942. A 6-inch gun, the standard for light cruisers, required careful handling, loading shells that weighed over 100 pounds, aiming precisely at moving targets under varying conditions, compensating for wind, humidity, the rolling motion of the ship, and the inherent delay in human operation. Even the most disciplined crews on Japanese vessels could achieve perhaps half the rate reportedly sustained by this enigmatic ship. The very suggestion that one vessel could maintain such a rate of fire was enough to make intelligence officers question their understanding of mechanics, training, and physics. The discussions in Tokyo were both technical and psychological. Senior analysts reviewed schematics, crew drills, and ordnance manuals, comparing each against the witness reports. They debated whether the Americans had developed a new type of automatic loading system, perhaps a naval version of the machine gun concept that could keep 6-inch shells in continuous circulation, aimed and discharged with terrifying efficiency. Others feared it was more than a mechanical innovation. Could it be the audacity and discipline of the American sailors themselves, working as a single, nearly machine-like unit? The uncertainty gnawed at officers trained to find patterns, to predict enemy behavior, to calculate probability with almost clinical precision. Meanwhile, in the Solomons, the battle itself had unfolded with almost cinematic intensity. The American cruiser, whose identity would be carefully documented, but whose reputation was already spreading among both sides, as a vessel of near mythical capability, had moved into position along a narrow stretch of water near Cape Esperance. Japanese scouts, unprepared for this level of intensity, reported flashes along the ship's deck as though the vessel had been rigged with hundreds of simultaneous gun turrets. But this was no trick of light or imagination. The cruiser's gunners were performing with a level of speed, coordination, and accuracy that created the impression of solid, continuous fire. Sailors on nearby vessels watched in shock as Japanese cruisers and destroyers were engulfed in a hailstorm of shells, hulls ruptured, masts shattered, and decks torn apart in a manner that seemed almost choreographed by some unseen force. The crews of the American ship, however, were not operating in secret for spectacle. Every shell fired was part of a calculated, precise engagement strategy, honed through rigorous training, careful observation, and the innovative doctrine of rapid, sustained fire. American naval strategy had long emphasized the combination of speed, firepower, and accuracy. But the operationalization of this principle at Cape Esperance was unprecedented. The crew themselves described working in almost synchronous rhythm, a flow of movement and timing that allowed them to maximize output without sacrificing precision. Every gun crew knew the target, the sequence, and the exact moment to fire, creating a continuous barrage that gave the impression of a supernatural rate of fire. Japanese ships were caught in an inferno they were ill-prepared to withstand. Their gunners returned fire, but coordination was difficult under the assault. Communication was impeded by the chaos of exploding shells, smoke, and the constant movement required to avoid hits. Orders had to be shouted over the roar of battle. Officers struggled to maintain control, and sailors on deck faced a storm of destruction that left little room for error. The American cruiser, in contrast, moved with a mechanical rhythm, its guns firing with relentless precision. Survivors would later describe the feeling of being under fire from a ship that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of war. The rate, intensity, and consistency of the barrage created a psychological effect that was as devastating as the physical destruction. By the end of the engagement, Japanese officers were grappling with reports that bordered on the unbelievable. Estimates of shells fired, damage inflicted, and enemy casualties were staggering. Reconstructions attempted in Tokyo suggested that no single ship should have been capable of such sustained output. Intelligence officers exchanged worried glances, recognizing that the enemy had introduced either a technological breakthrough beyond comprehension or an operational methodology that redefined the limits of coordinated naval gunnery. For men trained to rely on strict calculations, this was more than a surprise. It was a crisis of certainty. Amid the technical analysis, some officers allowed themselves to consider the psychological ramifications. A ship that could fire continuously, seemingly without pause, altered not only the mechanics of battle, but the mindset of the sailors who faced it. Fear, confusion, hesitation, all became weapons of the American crew. The phenomenon of sustained fire that appeared nearly unstoppable imposed a cognitive burden on Japanese crews, forcing them into defensive postures and slowing their response. Entire tactical doctrines that emphasized maneuver, formation, and fire concentration were suddenly rendered vulnerable to a single, unpredictable variable. For American historians and naval enthusiasts examining these events decades later, This engagement would be remembered as one of the most remarkable demonstrations of gunnery efficiency and psychological impact in naval history. It combined raw firepower, crew discipline, tactical innovation, and an almost uncanny level of coordination, creating an impression of impossibility that persists in historical accounts. Even contemporary sailors, reading the dispatches, would remark on the improbable nature of the engagement, noting that the cruisers' sustained fire seemed more like science fiction than reality. Despite the chaos of battle, the Americans maintained operational control. The ship itself, a testament to design, discipline, and doctrine, was not merely firing indiscriminately. Each salvo was targeted, each shot calculated, and each crew member trained to perform with exacting precision. This level of coordination was the product of both rigorous preparation and adaptive tactics, a synergy that allowed a single light cruiser to achieve an effect usually reserved for entire squadrons of ships. The legend that emerged from Guadalcanal and Cape Esperance was therefore grounded in both fact and perception. Fact in the extraordinary rate of fire, perception in the almost supernatural speed and consistency that challenged enemy expectations. Back in Tokyo, intelligence officers continued their analysis. Debates raged over whether the reports indicated an entirely new type of naval gun system or an operational approach that combined existing technology with revolutionary crew training. Some suggested that the Americans had developed a 6-inch naval machine gun, capable of rapid firing beyond standard rates. Others posited hydraulic or mechanical innovations that allowed multiple shells to be loaded and discharged in near-continuous succession. Yet, no definitive proof existed, and the sheer audacity of the engagement left commanders questioning the limits of engineering and human coordination. By the time word reached the highest echelons of the Japanese Navy, the psychological impact had spread far beyond the immediate theater. Strategic planners understood that the engagement at Cape Esperance represented a new paradigm in naval warfare. The possibility that a single vessel could dominate an area through sustained, rapid fire forced a reconsideration of fleet formations, patrol strategies, and even the broader approach to naval engagement in the Pacific. Traditional doctrines, which had worked against slower, less coordinated fleets, were suddenly vulnerable to a combination of firepower and human precision that had not been accounted for in prior war plans. Even the language of reports reflected the officers' struggle to reconcile reality with expectation. Words like unreal, impossible, and monster peppered the intelligence summaries, conveying both admiration and fear. Sailors who had survived the encounter told stories with a mix of awe and terror, emphasizing not just the destruction inflicted, but the eerie precision, the relentless rhythm, and the apparent inexhaustibility of the cruiser's guns. The perception of invincibility, combined with the tangible effects of sustained fire, transformed a single ship into an instrument of psychological warfare, long before the concept would be formally recognized by military theorists. The American crew, in contrast, remained focused, disciplined, and professional. They were aware of the damage inflicted, the effectiveness of their coordinated fire, and the confusion it caused among Japanese forces. But they approached the operation with routine precision rather than mythic bravado. Their success was a product of training, innovation, and cohesion, a practical demonstration of principles taught in naval academies and reinforced through hours of drilling, practice, and adaptation to combat conditions. By the end of the day, the Solomons bore witness to a phenomenon that would be recounted for decades. Ships lay wrecked, survivors carried harrowing tales, and Japanese officers scrambled to understand how one light cruiser could achieve what many believed to be impossible. The engagement highlighted the intersection of human ingenuity, mechanical capability, and tactical discipline. It demonstrated that in warfare, perception is as critical as firepower, and that extraordinary coordination can create results that appear almost supernatural to those on the receiving end. Historians would later analyze the engagement in technical detail, examining rates of fire, crew drills, mechanical capabilities, and environmental conditions. Modern studies suggest that while no single naval 6-inch gun had been transformed into a literal machine gun, the combination of meticulous training, rapid loading techniques, and the effective rotation of gun crews allowed the American cruiser to sustain an unprecedented rate of fire. What seemed impossible to Japanese intelligence at the time was, in reality, a highly optimized operational system. Human ingenuity amplified by disciplined execution. Yet even decades later, the legend of that light cruiser persists. Survivor accounts, historical studies, and naval analyses all agree that the battle at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal produced effects that were extraordinary, terrifying, and, for the Japanese crews, almost incomprehensible. The image of muzzle flashes, forming a continuous line along the deck, of shell after shell striking enemy ships with unerring precision, and of a vessel that seemed to defy the natural limits of artillery, remains one of the most vivid examples of coordination, discipline, and psychological impact in naval history. As dawn broke over the Solomons, the aftermath of the previous night's engagement was still burning in the minds of Japanese naval officers. Reports continued to arrive from scattered units, each describing the same phenomenon. The American light cruiser, which had already carved a path of destruction through their fleet, remained elusive, almost untouchable. Ships that had survived the initial bombardment were limping back toward base, their crews exhausted, their morale shattered. Officers struggled to piece together the mechanics of what they had witnessed. The rate of fire, the precision, the sheer volume of shells, none of it made sense. No doctrine, no historical precedent, and no technology on record could explain the events. Japanese intelligence immediately convened emergency sessions, calling in engineers, gunnery experts, and senior captains to examine the reports. Some suggested mechanical innovation, an automated loading system, a hydraulic mechanism, or an experimental anti-ship cannon. Others argued that the American crew's discipline and coordination were simply beyond anything they had encountered, a combination of human efficiency and tactical genius. Still, even the most imaginative analysts admitted that a single light cruiser firing continuously at such speed and precision bordered on the impossible. Officers leaned over maps, tracing the movements of the American vessel, noting every reported salvo and trying to reconstruct what had occurred. Each hypothesis seemed inadequate, Each calculation failed to align with the staggering casualty figures.
Meanwhile, back at the Solomons, the American cruiser continued to operate with meticulous precision. Its crew had learned from previous engagements that speed and rhythm were as vital as accuracy. Every gun crew moved in a synchronized dance, a choreography honed through drills and real combat experience. Shells were loaded, aimed, and fired in seamless succession. One crew would load, while another aimed, while a third fired, creating a cycle that maximized output without compromising precision. The effect was a continuous wall of fire, a relentless barrage that Japanese officers later described as machine-like. For sailors on deck, the sight was awe-inspiring and terrifying. A line of muzzle flashes that seemed solid, casting light across the waves and revealing the destruction below. Japanese commanders attempted to adapt. They reorganized formations, ordered counter-barrages, and attempted evasive maneuvers. But the American cruiser anticipated these reactions. The ship's gunners adjusted their aim dynamically, tracking multiple targets simultaneously, compensating for the rolling of the sea, the speed of enemy vessels, and the timing of their own salvos. Even under heavy smoke and shell fire, the cruiser's rate of fire never faltered. Japanese crews soon realized that traditional tactics, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated flanking, or concentrated broadsides were ineffective against this level of operational efficiency. The conventional rules of engagement no longer applied. Sailors who survived the encounter later described the psychological impact as devastating. Not only were ships being destroyed at an unprecedented rate, but the very act of facing this seemingly unstoppable barrage created confusion and fear. Officers struggled to maintain command, issuing orders that were often impossible to execute under the relentless pressure of shells striking at intervals so rapid it seemed continuous. Men froze on deck, hesitated to return fire, and misjudged maneuvers. In many ways, the American cruiser's greatest weapon was not its shells, but the terror it instilled in those who faced it. The rate of fire had become a force multiplier, amplifying its destructive potential far beyond what raw numbers could convey. Japanese intelligence was forced to take drastic measures. Reconnaissance reports indicated that the cruiser operated with extraordinary coordination, and that its speed of fire could not be attributed to a single technological innovation. Senior officers speculated that multiple factors were at play: training, crew discipline, morale, and an innovative approach to rapid-fire gunnery. Orders were sent out to concentrate fire, coordinate multiple ships for simultaneous targeting, and attempt to overwhelm the cruiser with sheer volume. In theory, a massed counterattack should have neutralized it. In practice, it failed. Even coordinated barrages often missed or fell short, while the cruiser continued to engage targets with pinpoint accuracy. Tactical reports noted that the cruiser's positioning was also a critical factor. It often took advantage of narrow straits, reefs, and coastal features to reduce the number of angles from which it could be engaged. Japanese scouts attempted to predict its movements, but the Americans displayed an uncanny ability to choose positions that maximized firing efficiency while minimizing exposure. The result was a nearly invincible platform, capable of sustaining an extraordinary rate of fire while evading return strikes. Each maneuver was calculated with precision, every shot deliberate.
For Japanese officers, it was as though the ship had anticipated every possible countermeasure before it was even ordered. At the individual level, American gunners described operating in a state of intense focus. Training had emphasized rhythm, efficiency, and situational awareness.
Each gun crew communicated through hand signals, brief verbal cues, and precise timing, ensuring that the firing sequence remained unbroken. In the chaos of battle, these systems allowed them to maintain an almost inhuman pace. Officers later noted that their ability to rotate crews, manage heat buildup in the barrels, and adjust for trajectory on the fly contributed to the sustained rate of fire. It was a combination of preparation, discipline, and innovation that made the cruiser's performance seem otherworldly to the enemy. The engagement at Guadalcanal also demonstrated the interplay of human skill and mechanical design. The cruiser's guns, standard 6-inch models, were pushed to the limits of operational efficiency. Crew rotations, rapid loading procedures, and precise aiming techniques allowed the guns to fire faster than conventional doctrine recommended. The apparent machine gun effect was achieved not through new technology, but through human coordination and disciplined execution. This blurred the line between human capability and mechanical output, creating the illusion of a weapon that defied physics. Japanese officers, observing the destruction from afar, attempted to rationalize the events. Could a single vessel really fire 1,500 shells in an hour? Was there a hidden loading mechanism, an undiscovered innovation? Or was it the extraordinary synchronization of an experienced crew, a combination of training, courage, and battlefield adaptation? Reports were inconclusive, and the ambiguity fed into the sense of dread. Officers admitted privately that facing the cruiser was like facing an immovable, unstoppable phenomenon. The tactics of the past seemed irrelevant, and every maneuver felt like a gamble. On board the American cruiser, morale remained high. The crew had trained for years in coordination and speed, but no one had fully anticipated the psychological effect their performance would have on the enemy. Sailors focused on procedure, not legend. Every shot counted, and every salvo was executed according to plan. There was no sense of magic or myth, only a relentless adherence to discipline and duty. Yet for those watching from the Japanese side, the results were indistinguishable from a miracle. The ship seemed to fire continuously, strike with unerring precision, and evade countermeasures effortlessly. As reports continued to circulate, the engagement began to take on a symbolic significance. The American cruiser became a representation of ingenuity, discipline, and tactical innovation. Japanese commanders, grappling with the limitations of their own understanding, began to question doctrine, technology, and assumptions about human capability. Could a single vessel, operating at the limits of efficiency, redefine the rules of engagement? For the officers tasked with defending the Solomons, the answer appeared to be yes. Every report reinforced the idea that the cruiser was not merely a ship, but a weapon that transcended conventional naval theory. The consequences extended beyond the immediate battle. Japanese planning for future engagements had to account for the possibility of a vessel capable of such sustained fire. Fleet formations were reconsidered, patrol routes altered, and the psychological impact on sailors factored into every decision. The American cruiser had not only destroyed ships, it had disrupted strategic thinking,
forcing the Imperial Navy to confront an unpredictable, highly efficient adversary that challenged every assumption about firepower and coordination. By the end of the engagement, the legacy of the cruiser was firmly established. Survivors recounted the continuous wall of fire, the glowing line of muzzle flashes, and the almost supernatural coordination of the gunners. Intelligence officers in Tokyo continued to puzzle over how it had been achieved. Was it a technological secret? An innovative crew rotation method? Or simply the result of meticulous training and discipline? The ambiguity ensured that the legend of the cruiser would endure, whispered among sailors and recorded in naval archives as one of the most extraordinary examples of operational efficiency in the Pacific theater. The psychological warfare aspect cannot be overstated. Japanese sailors facing the cruiser described moments of paralysis, hesitation, and terror that were as deadly as the physical impact of the shells. Entire units retreated or delayed maneuvers, unsure of how to respond to a barrage that seemed unending. The combination of firepower, accuracy, and relentless pace created a tactical advantage that went beyond conventional measures of strength. For the Americans, this was not an intentional psychological ploy. It was a byproduct of optimized operation. But for the enemy, it was devastating. In retrospect, historians have noted that the engagement illustrates a fundamental principle of warfare. Human coordination, training, and execution can amplify mechanical capability far beyond theoretical limits. The cruiser's performance was not the result of magical weapons or unknown science, but of disciplined, highly skilled human crews working in perfect synchronization. It was an operational masterpiece, one that forced an entire navy to rethink assumptions about firepower, crew efficiency, and the limits of conventional engagement. In the days following the engagement at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal, Japanese naval intelligence scrambled to comprehend the scope of what they had witnessed. The cruiser's performance had exceeded all expectations, shattered preconceptions, and rendered conventional tactics almost meaningless. Officers in Tokyo convened repeated briefings, poring over the survivor testimonies, intercepted communications, and battle logs. But every reconstruction revealed the same staggering reality. One American light cruiser, through a combination of human skill and mechanical capability, had wrought destruction on a scale previously unimaginable. Each report seemed to contradict itself. The destruction was total, yet the ship remained elusive, untouchable, almost spectral. The Japanese Navy attempted to understand the technical possibilities. Engineers studied schematics of the ship's 6-inch guns, looking for hidden mechanisms, automatic loaders, or hydraulic enhancements that might account for the rapid, sustained fire. Gunnery instructors debated the maximum rate of fire achievable under ideal conditions, while fleet captains discussed potential tactical formations that could neutralize a vessel capable of such output. All efforts led to the same conclusion. Nothing on record could explain the reported performance. The ship's apparent ability to fire continuously, adjust aim instantly, and coordinate salvos across multiple turrets created an effect indistinguishable from a naval machine gun, yet it was achieved with standard weaponry and no documented secret technology. Meanwhile, in the Solomons, the American cruiser's crew returned to routine operations with the disciplined focus that had made their performance so extraordinary. Every gun crew continued drills, refined timing sequences, and maintained barrels and ammunition with the meticulous attention of craftsmen. The system that allowed sustained fire was not a single technological miracle, but a carefully orchestrated human-machine interaction. Loading teams rotated seamlessly, targeting officers' calculated trajectories in real time, and communication was precise, minimizing delays.
The efficiency was terrifying in its effectiveness and almost invisible to the casual observer.
Only through repeated engagements did the pattern emerge. Japanese officers tried to simulate these conditions, creating training exercises and simulations that mirrored the intensity and precision reported. Yet even with multiple ships firing in concert and experienced crews operating under controlled conditions, the rate of fire achieved by the American cruiser remained unmatched. What made the engagement unique was not only the speed of operation, but the crew's synchronization. The timing between loading, aiming, and firing was perfect, allowing continuous fire without pauses while maintaining pinpoint accuracy against multiple moving targets. The cruiser's gunners had mastered a rhythm that became a weapon itself, one that Japanese sailors would later describe in terms that blurred reality and legend. As the Japanese Navy grappled with the implications, they also had to contend with the human dimension. Morale. Officers reported that fear among crews was palpable. Witnesses described sailors freezing, misjudging maneuvers, or hesitating to return fire under the relentless barrage. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion, shouting orders over the roar of guns and the pounding of waves. The psychological effect of the American cruiser was as lethal as the shells it fired. Men questioned their training, doubted their technology, and wondered if the vessel's speed and precision were humanly possible. In essence, the ship had weaponized fear itself, creating an operational advantage that extended far beyond the technical realm. The cruiser's tactics also demonstrated a profound understanding of geography and maneuver warfare. It often positioned itself in narrow passages, behind islands, or near reefs, reducing the angles from which it could be targeted. Observers noted that it shifted positions dynamically, using cover and line-of-sight advantages while maintaining the optimal firing posture. The Japanese attempted to predict its movements using scouting planes, reconnaissance reports, and patterns inferred from previous engagements. But the cruiser consistently chose positions that maximized its rate of fire and minimized vulnerability. Each relocation seemed deliberate, methodical, and preemptive, creating the impression that the ship anticipated enemy intentions before they were realized. On the operational level, this engagement forced a re-evaluation of naval doctrine. Fleet formations, long considered the cornerstone of battle strategy, were suddenly vulnerable. The cruiser's firepower could suppress multiple ships simultaneously, making coordinated maneuvers risky and difficult. Japanese commanders discussed dispersal tactics, alternative patrol patterns, and concentrated counterattacks. Yet every plan seemed to falter in the face of the cruiser's sustained assault. Its efficiency forced the enemy to think differently, to innovate on the fly, and to reconsider fundamental assumptions about gunnery, positioning, and fleet coordination. Survivor accounts added a layer of surrealism to the narrative. Sailors spoke of muzzle flashes forming a continuous line along the deck, creating the illusion of a solid barrier of light. Waves reflected the fire, amplifying the visual impact and instilling fear even among observers who were not under direct attack. The roar of repeated salvos, combined with the near-perfect timing, produced a soundscape of chaos that intensified psychological stress. Crew members, even those uninjured, described a sense of inevitability, a feeling that nothing they did could halt the assault. This psychological dimension transformed a conventional naval engagement into a form of warfare that relied as heavily on perception and morale as on shells and steel. Japanese intelligence, desperate for answers, considered every possibility. Was there an unknown mechanical innovation? Had the Americans discovered a method of rapid-fire artillery that defied convention? Or was the phenomenon purely human, a product of rigorous training, coordination, and discipline? Analysts concluded that the latter explanation was most probable. Yet the effect was indistinguishable from technological innovation. The American crew had essentially converted human efficiency into a weapon, producing results that confounded engineering calculations and shattered assumptions about what was possible at sea. The operational success of the cruiser had broader implications. Its effectiveness demonstrated that small units, properly trained and coordinated, could produce disproportionate results. A single vessel, executing its procedures flawlessly, could dominate an area, disrupt enemy formations, and inflict substantial material and psychological damage. For the Americans, this engagement validated principles of coordination, timing, and precision, lessons that would inform future naval operations throughout the Pacific Campaign. Meanwhile, Japanese officers continued to speculate, attempting to attribute the ship's performance to innovations, secret technology, or unorthodox tactics. Yet as more reports arrived, the pattern became undeniable. The cruiser was not a product of chance or experimental technology. It was the embodiment of operational excellence, human discipline, and tactical foresight. Its performance would be studied for decades, not as a miracle of engineering, but as a case study in maximizing human and mechanical potential under extreme conditions. The cruiser's legend grew beyond the battlefield. Among American sailors, stories circulated about the psychological effect on enemy crews. Officers recounted how Japanese sailors would hesitate, retreat prematurely, or fail to coordinate counterattacks. The very reputation of the ship became a strategic asset, amplifying its effectiveness without additional firepower. Psychological warfare, usually considered a separate domain, became an intrinsic part of its operational impact. The cruiser's efficiency created fear as effectively as any salvo, demonstrating the interplay between perception and reality in warfare. As the campaign in the Solomons continued, Japanese forces adjusted strategies, attempting to avoid direct engagement with the cruiser when possible. Convoys were rerouted, patrols were modified, and commanders emphasized caution over aggression. The Americans, in turn, maintained their operational tempo, continuing to leverage the cruiser's strengths while applying lessons learned from each encounter. Coordination, timing, and precise execution remained paramount, ensuring that the ship could sustain its remarkable rate of fire without sacrificing accuracy or efficiency. Historians examining the engagement later emphasized several key factors. First, the cruiser's performance was a product of human skill, amplified by mechanical reliability. Second, the psychological impact on enemy forces contributed significantly to operational success. Third, the integration of training, strategy, and adaptability created a system that exceeded the sum of its parts. The result was a naval engagement in which perception, discipline, and execution combined to produce effects previously thought impossible. The reports reaching Tokyo also began to document a new form of tactical thinking. Officers observed that conventional formations were vulnerable to small, highly coordinated units capable of sustained, concentrated fire. The cruiser's performance suggested that even a single vessel could alter the strategic landscape, forcing enemy planners to reconsider assumptions about fleet strength, distribution, and engagement.
The implications extended beyond the immediate theater. Japanese naval doctrine would need to adapt to a reality in which efficiency and discipline could outperform brute force. At the tactical level, the cruiser demonstrated mastery over both space and time. It selected firing positions that maximized coverage while minimizing vulnerability. It rotated gun crews to maintain output without fatigue, and it synchronized movements and salvos with extraordinary precision. Japanese forces, attempting to match this capability, were forced to confront the limits of their own training and organizational structure. The psychological and physical pressure exerted by the cruiser created confusion and hesitation, further amplifying its tactical advantage. As survivors recounted the events, certain patterns became clear. The American cruiser's success relied on rhythm and timing, careful coordination of multiple gun crews, and the disciplined execution of a pre-planned sequence of actions. This allowed the ship to maintain a continuous rate of fire, striking multiple targets in rapid succession without delay. The apparent impossible rate of fire was thus not the result of novel technology, but of optimized operation, a demonstration of human capability at the edge of efficiency. By the end of these engagements, the cruiser had achieved what few vessels in history could claim: mastery over both its enemy and the environment in which it operated. Its gunners had demonstrated precision, speed, and resilience under pressure, while its presence alone altered enemy behavior and disrupted conventional tactics. The lessons of Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal would echo throughout the Pacific, influencing both Japanese strategy and American operational doctrine. In the weeks following the initial engagement at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal, Japanese Naval Command struggled to contain both the operational and psychological impact of the American light cruiser. Reports continued to arrive detailing its extraordinary rate of fire, the precision of its gunners, and the destruction inflicted on Imperial Navy vessels. Each communication seemed to amplify the legend. The cruiser was not just a ship. It had become an instrument of fear, a ghostly figure in the night that could alter the course of entire battles. Officers in Tokyo pored over the reports, tracing the cruiser's maneuvers, tallying the casualties inflicted, and attempting to reconcile the impossible numbers with the mechanics of conventional naval warfare. Attempts to neutralize the cruiser were immediate, but largely ineffective. Japanese fleets attempted to concentrate fire, coordinating multiple ships to overwhelm it with volume. In theory, the combined firepower of several cruisers and destroyers should have been sufficient to disable the vessel.
In practice, these efforts failed. The American ship operated with extraordinary efficiency, its gunners rotating seamlessly, adjusting aim in real time, and firing continuously. Japanese salvos often fell short or missed entirely, while the cruiser maintained a near-constant barrage against multiple targets. The sheer coordination of its crew rendered standard countermeasures inadequate. Observers from both sides noted the uncanny precision of the cruiser's fire. Shells struck with pinpoint accuracy, often disabling critical sections of enemy ships while leaving other areas largely untouched. Crew members on Japanese vessels reported that the pattern of fire seemed deliberate, almost surgical, a systematic dismantling of enemy combat capability. It was not indiscriminate destruction, but targeted, strategic, and devastatingly effective. Survivors spoke of the uncanny timing between shots, the rhythm of the salvos, and the way the ship seemed to anticipate maneuvers before they occurred. The psychological impact was equally significant.
Japanese sailors who survived encounters with the cruiser described a sense of inevitability, a feeling that no matter what actions they took, the barrage would continue. Precise, relentless, and unstoppable. Hesitation, confusion, and fear spread rapidly, eroding cohesion and reducing the effectiveness of counterattacks. Officers struggled to maintain order, shouting commands that were often ignored or impossible to execute under the relentless pressure of shell fire. The cruiser's presence alone dictated the tempo and direction of engagements, transforming tactical decision-making into a defensive, reactive exercise. Intelligence officers in Tokyo intensified their analysis. They dispatched reconnaissance planes and monitoring vessels to track the cruiser's movements, seeking patterns that could reveal weaknesses or technological innovations. Engineers examined reports for clues about gun mechanics, loading procedures, and crew deployment. Some theorized that an automated or semi-automated loading system might be in use, capable of sustaining a rate of fire far beyond conventional methods. Others argued that the performance was purely human, the result of rigorous training, crew rotation, and operational discipline. In either case, the data suggested a level of efficiency that had never before been documented in naval warfare. The cruiser's operational methods were indeed revolutionary, though entirely grounded in disciplined execution. Gun crews followed precise sequences. One team loaded shells, another aimed, another fired, and a fourth coordinated targeting adjustments. This allowed continuous fire while compensating for barrel heat, recoil, and fatigue. Officers rotated teams seamlessly, maintaining a relentless tempo without sacrificing accuracy. The apparent impossibility of sustained fire at this scale was the product of rigorous preparation and coordination, demonstrating that human efficiency, when optimized, could rival or surpass mechanical limits. Japanese commanders attempted new strategies to counter the ship. They dispersed formations to reduce the effectiveness of concentrated fire, sent scouting vessels to predict the cruiser's movements, and deployed coordinated counter barrages. Yet the American vessel adapted dynamically. Its gunners tracked multiple targets simultaneously, calculated trajectories under varying conditions, and rotated positions to minimize exposure while maximizing firepower. Each maneuver seemed premeditated, executed with a precision that confounded enemy planners. The ship's actions transformed the rules of engagement,
forcing commanders to reconsider established doctrines and confront the limitations of their own crews. The consequences extended beyond individual battles. Reports indicated that entire sectors of the Solomons became zones of avoidance, areas where Japanese forces hesitated to advance due to the presence of the cruiser. Convoys were rerouted, offensive operations delayed, and patrols modified to reduce the risk of encountering the vessel. The American ship's ability to sustain a high rate of fire and operate with near invulnerability created a strategic advantage that exceeded its physical firepower. Psychological dominance, achieved through relentless precision and visible destruction, became a critical component of naval warfare in the theater. Accounts from survivors provide insight into the human dimension of these engagements. Sailors described the eerie sight of continuous muzzle flashes along the cruiser's deck, a visual effect amplified by darkness and reflection on the water. The roar of repeated salvos created a sensory overload, disorienting crews and complicating command. Men reported moments of paralysis, hesitation to act, and misjudgments in maneuvering under pressure. These reactions, though subtle, multiplied the effectiveness of the cruiser's firepower. Fear itself had become a force multiplier.
The operational success of the cruiser was also tied to its tactical positioning. Commanders selected narrow passages, coastal inlets, and islands as firing platforms, minimizing exposure while maximizing target coverage. The ship's mobility allowed it to exploit line-of-sight advantages, repositioning quickly to sustain continuous engagement while avoiding concentrated enemy fire. Each movement was calculated to preserve the rhythm of gunfire, ensuring that salvos remained uninterrupted and targets continuously engaged. Observers described the pattern as almost preordained, with the cruiser appearing in optimal firing positions just as enemy vessels maneuvered into range. Japanese intelligence responded with increasingly desperate measures. Special units were deployed to observe, track, and, if possible, disable the cruiser. Reconnaissance planes flew repetitive circuits, mapping potential ambush points. Surface ships attempted coordinated attacks, focusing on areas of vulnerability identified from previous engagements. Despite these efforts, the cruiser's operational methods remained elusive. Human coordination, precision, and adaptability combined to create a system that consistently outperformed expectations and confounded countermeasures. The legend of the cruiser spread rapidly, both among Japanese sailors and in intelligence circles. Stories of the continuous wall of fire, of targets struck with surgical precision, and of the ship's apparent invulnerability became common currency. Even officers who had never seen the vessel firsthand absorbed the narrative, adjusting strategic plans and fleet deployments in anticipation of encounters that might never occur. The combination of documented success and psychological impact elevated the cruiser from a tactical asset to a symbol of American ingenuity and operational mastery in the Pacific. American gunners, for their part, continued their operations without pause. Drills emphasized synchronization, crew rotation, and the precise timing of each salvo. Training routines were refined based on feedback from engagements, and every encounter reinforced the importance of rhythm and coordination. The crew's success was a testament to preparation and discipline, rather than any magical technology. Each member understood their role within the system
and the collective execution produced effects that seemed almost supernatural to those observing from the enemy side. The sustained rate of fire achieved by the cruiser also had strategic implications. Its ability to dominate engagements with limited resources demonstrated that a single, well-operated vessel could influence the outcome of multiple battles. This challenged traditional notions of naval superiority, emphasizing the role of human coordination, tactical innovation, and disciplined execution over sheer numbers or raw firepower. In effect, the cruiser transformed a tactical advantage into a strategic asset, reshaping the balance of power in localized theaters of operation. Japanese planners faced a stark reality. Conventional responses were insufficient. Massed attacks were repelled, standard maneuvers proved ineffective, and the psychological impact on crews magnified operational challenges. Reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and tactical innovation were critical. But even these measures often fell short against a vessel operating at the limits of human coordination. The cruiser's success demonstrated that operational excellence, when optimized and executed flawlessly, could surpass expectations and redefine the possibilities of warfare. Survivor accounts underscore the dual nature of the cruiser's impact. The physical destruction was undeniable: ships disabled, lives lost, and critical positions compromised. Equally significant, however, was the intangible effect on morale and decision-making.
Fear, anticipation, and uncertainty influenced actions, slowed reactions, and amplified the effectiveness of every salvo. The American crew had, knowingly or not, weaponized both human skill and perception, creating an operational advantage that extended far beyond traditional measures of firepower. Historians analyzing these events later emphasized the interplay between technology, human coordination, and psychological impact. The cruiser's guns were standard models, yet the operational system implemented by the crew allowed sustained fire at a rate previously considered impossible. The synergy of training, crew rotation, tactical positioning, and precise communication created a result that surpassed theoretical limits. For Japanese forces, this combination was devastating. For the Americans, it was a demonstration of what disciplined, coordinated execution could achieve under extreme conditions. By the end of the campaign, the cruiser had established a legacy that extended beyond individual battles. Its performance illustrated the potential of operational optimization, the value of human discipline in maximizing mechanical capability, and the strategic power of psychological influence. Fleet commanders, both Japanese and American, would study these engagements for years, seeking to understand how a single vessel could dominate multiple confrontations, disrupt enemy planning, and create effects that transcended conventional expectations. The story of the American light cruiser at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal remains one of the most compelling examples of operational mastery in naval history. It demonstrates that the integration of human skill, tactical innovation, and precise execution can produce outcomes that appear impossible, even to seasoned observers. The lessons of these engagements, the importance of coordination, rhythm, adaptability, and psychological influence, continue to resonate in military studies, underscoring the profound impact of disciplined, well-executed operations in shaping the course of conflict. As the Solomon Islands campaign drew on,
The American light cruiser's legend had solidified into something that bordered on myth for Japanese sailors and commanders alike. Its continuous wall of fire, unmatched precision, and uncanny ability to strike multiple targets with surgical accuracy had become the standard by which all naval efficiency would be measured. Reports from Guadalcanal, Cape Esperance, and surrounding waters all painted a consistent picture. The cruiser was a force that could dominate engagements on its own, reshaping enemy tactics simply by being present. Even when it retreated temporarily for resupply or maintenance, its reputation preceded it, forcing Japanese planners to operate with extreme caution, often delaying or canceling operations to avoid confrontation. In operational terms, the cruiser had transformed the American approach to naval engagements in the Pacific. Commanders had learned that a single, well-trained, disciplined crew, operating standard weapons with optimized procedures, could achieve effects previously thought impossible. Human coordination had been weaponized to the maximum extent, a concept that seemed almost abstract until witnessed in real combat. The interplay between crew rotation, firing rhythm, tactical positioning, and environmental awareness allowed the ship to maintain a sustained rate of fire that no traditional analysis could fully explain. It was not magic, nor was it advanced technology. It was the product of meticulous training, adaptability, and relentless discipline. For Japanese forces, this reality was deeply unsettling.
Fleets that had once relied on overwhelming numbers found themselves facing an adversary whose efficiency negated traditional advantages. Massed assaults failed to produce decisive results. Coordinated counter-barrages often missed their mark, and even well-planned ambushes could be neutralized through dynamic repositioning. Officers quickly realized that conventional doctrine had to be abandoned, or at least heavily modified when facing such an opponent. The cruiser's influence extended far beyond individual engagements, shaping strategy, morale, and decision-making across the theater. Survivor testimonies reveal the human dimension of the cruiser's impact in vivid detail. Sailors who had endured the barrages described moments of disbelief, awe, and terror. One Japanese officer recounted watching a salvo of shells strike a neighboring cruiser so quickly and accurately that it seemed the gun barrels were automated. Another sailor described how the continuous muzzle flashes, forming a near-solid line along the deck, illuminated the ocean like a deadly aurora, making it impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. These descriptions, while dramatic, are consistent across multiple sources, highlighting the psychological as well as physical effects of the cruiser's operations. The human element of fear was amplified by the unpredictability of the ship's movements. Japanese observers noted that the cruiser seemed to anticipate maneuvers, always appearing in positions that maximized its effectiveness while minimizing exposure. This perception of foresight was not the result of clairvoyance, but of disciplined tactical awareness, rapid decision-making, and a deep understanding of naval engagement dynamics. The psychological impact of facing an adversary who consistently acted with near-perfect timing cannot be overstated. Hesitation and indecision multiplied the cruiser's effectiveness, making each engagement even more destructive than raw firepower alone would suggest. American gunners, meanwhile, continued their operations with unwavering focus. Their training emphasized coordination, efficiency, and precise timing. Crew rotations, carefully planned sequences of loading, aiming, and firing, and meticulous attention to trajectory calculations
allowed the ship to maintain an unbroken tempo of fire. Officers ensured that each salvo contributed to the overall rhythm of battle, maximizing output without sacrificing accuracy. This disciplined execution created the illusion of a machine-like rate of fire, a perception that Japanese sailors interpreted as an almost supernatural capability. The operational brilliance of the cruiser also extended to logistics and maintenance. Ammunition was handled with precision, barrels were rotated to prevent overheating, and minor mechanical adjustments were made continuously to ensure optimal performance. The interplay of human skill and machine reliability created a system in which continuous fire could be sustained for hours without degradation. This level of operational sophistication, while invisible to the enemy, contributed significantly to the cruiser's legendary reputation. Each shell fired was the product of a complex but flawlessly executed sequence of human actions, synchronized to maximize both speed and accuracy. Japanese intelligence, struggling to understand the phenomenon, considered radical explanations. Some suggested the existence of experimental rapid-fire artillery, unknown mechanical innovations, or secret American technologies. Others argued that the performance could only be explained by an extraordinary degree of training and crew discipline. Historical analysis later confirmed the latter. There was no secret weapon or hidden mechanism. The apparent impossibility of the cruiser's sustained fire was entirely the result of human coordination, efficiency, and tactical insight applied to conventional weaponry. This understanding, however, did little to diminish the fear it inspired at the time. The cruiser's influence extended beyond immediate tactical engagements. By consistently demonstrating the effectiveness of human coordination and precise execution, it forced both Japanese and American commanders to rethink their operational doctrines. Fleet formations, traditionally the backbone of naval strategy, were no longer sufficient to guarantee success. Small, highly disciplined units could achieve disproportionate results, reshaping engagements and redefining the calculus of naval warfare. This insight would inform future American operations, contributing to the development of doctrines that emphasized speed, precision, and adaptability over sheer numerical superiority. Psychological warfare became an intrinsic aspect of the cruiser's effectiveness. The fear it inspired was palpable, influencing decision-making, slowing reaction times, and causing hesitation in situations that demanded immediate action. Japanese sailors reported moments of near paralysis under the barrage, instances in which they delayed returning fire or misjudged maneuvers. Commanders were forced to issue repeated orders, often with limited success, as the relentless tempo of the cruiser's fire disrupted both perception and action. The vessel's operational mastery was thus amplified by its ability to control the mental state of its adversaries, turning fear into a strategic weapon. The cruiser's legacy in the Pacific theater is inseparable from the human skill of its crew. Each engagement was a demonstration of what disciplined, coordinated execution could achieve. The ship's guns, while standard 6-inch models, were operated with precision and efficiency that allowed them to exceed conventional performance expectations. Crew rotations, targeting protocols, and coordinated firing sequences
transformed the vessel into a force that could dominate engagements and reshape enemy behavior. Historians emphasize that this was not a matter of technology alone. It was an operational system, a combination of training, coordination, and psychological influence that produced extraordinary results. By the end of the campaign, the cruiser had established a strategic advantage that extended far beyond its immediate engagements. Japanese forces altered their plans to avoid confrontation, rerouted convoys, and delayed offensive operations in anticipation of its arrival. The vessel's reputation had become a force multiplier, influencing operational decisions across the theater. Even in periods of inactivity, the mere knowledge of the cruiser's potential impact constrained enemy action, demonstrating the enduring power of operational excellence combined with psychological influence. Accounts of the cruiser's engagements emphasize both the technical and human dimensions of warfare. On the mechanical side, it showcased how optimized procedures, crew rotations, and precise timing could maximize the output of standard weaponry. On the human side, it illustrated the profound impact of fear, anticipation, and uncertainty on decision-making and combat performance. Together, these factors created a system in which a single, well-operated ship could dominate multiple engagements, disrupt enemy strategy, and inflict both physical and psychological damage far beyond its apparent capabilities. The historical significance of these events is enduring. The American light cruiser demonstrated principles that would shape naval doctrine for decades. The importance of crew training, the optimization of human-machine interaction, and the integration of psychological effects into operational planning. It highlighted that efficiency, coordination, and adaptability could achieve results that raw firepower alone could not. And it underscored the strategic value of human skill applied systematically to conventional weaponry. The ship became a case study in operational mastery, teaching lessons that remain relevant to military planners and historians alike. Even decades later, veterans of the campaign recall the extraordinary nature of the cruiser's engagements. Sailors describe the continuous line of muzzle flashes, the almost hypnotic rhythm of salvos, and the devastating precision of its fire. Japanese officers, in particular, acknowledged that their inability to neutralize the vessel was as much a result of human factors as technological limitations. Hesitation, fear, and misjudgment magnified the impact of each shell fired, turning operational excellence into a psychological weapon. The cruiser's legacy, therefore, lies not only in the destruction it caused, but in the lessons it provided about human performance, coordination, and the dynamics of fear in combat. In conclusion, the story of the American light cruiser at Guadalcanal and Cape Esperance represents one of the most remarkable examples of operational efficiency, tactical innovation, and psychological impact in naval history. It illustrates how disciplined execution, coordinated action, and human ingenuity can create effects that appear impossible, even to experienced observers. The ship's crew transformed standard weaponry into a continuous, highly effective force, demonstrating that human skill, when optimized, can redefine the limits of what is achievable in warfare. The lessons of these engagements continue to resonate in military studies. The cruiser's performance underscores the importance of crew training, precise coordination, and the integration of psychological considerations into operational planning. It shows that fear can be weaponized, that perception is as powerful as reality, and that disciplined execution can achieve results far beyond conventional expectations. For historians, strategists, and military enthusiasts, the story of this vessel remains a testament to the extraordinary potential of human skill applied with precision, and a vivid reminder that in the chaos of combat, coordination, discipline, and innovation can become decisive weapons in their own right. The legend of the cruiser endures, not merely because of the destruction it caused, but because of the lessons it provides. It demonstrates that operational excellence can transform ordinary tools into extraordinary instruments of power. That human coordination can rival the effectiveness of technology, and that psychological mastery can shape the course of battles as decisively as any salvo. In the vast and chaotic theater of the Pacific, one ship, operated with precision and discipline, became a force that defied expectation, reshaped tactics, and left an indelible mark on naval history.